Pete Crosby has spent the last 25 years in sales, and quite frankly, his CV is too impressive and long to list off here. But some of his career highlights include working for Emetria and Cluster, being a board member for Sales Impact Academy, founding Pete Crosby Revenue, and most recently Revelesco, who offer mission-critical advice, coaching, and strategic support to startups and scale-ups between late-stage seed and Series C. Not only is Pete an incredible sales leader and a judge for the elites, he is also an ally and mentor for women in tech sales. In today's episode, we discuss how businesses can make sure there is no glass ceiling for women. We discuss simple steps businesses can do to attract female talent through language, job specs, and recruitment. In the words of Pete, businesses are not set up for women to be successful, so he gives advice on conducting reviews, creating transparent progression metrics, and finally, how women can have the confidence to achieve their worth. This was such an inspiring conversation, and one I'm sure you'll gain so much value from. Let's get into it.
To kind of take it back and paint the picture, as I know that you are a huge advocate for women in tech sales, why do you think they are so great in the industry and there should be more of them?
Well, I don't think there should be a they for a start. I think that the utopian position is that we hire people for their behaviours, their attributes and their values, and that should be agnostic of their gender, of their skin colour, of their ability, disability, whatever it may be. But the reality is that's not what we are today. And if we start from a purely agnostic position, we'll probably end up with mostly men, mostly white men applying for positions. Nothing wrong with attracting those candidates, but we want to attract a diverse pool. And every one of the women I work with, and I mean every single one, which is pretty much half of my entire coaching base, is extraordinary. They're really, really talented. And yet they have all had to fight harder to get where they are. They frequently experience, I guess I would call them microaggressions, sometimes not so micro, in day-to-day operations, which inhibit their ability to demonstrate how great they are. And it's ridiculous. All the evidence shows that, even if it wasn't just the right thing to do, all the evidence shows that a diverse team is a more successful team. It's obvious, isn't it? If you think about my co-founder of Revelesco, Emily, who randomly happens to be a woman, she also is incredibly creative. She thinks in a very different way to me. If I had a carbon copy of myself, we'd probably do all right, but we just wouldn't be as good as we are. So it's about having that diversity of brain, diversity of individual, and that means we absolutely should be making it easy for women to flourish. Right now, probably better than it has been, but it certainly is not easy.
No, and it isn't increasing, but we are still at 24% of the workforce is made up of women, which is still shocking. It's going in the right direction, and it's amazing to see so many people, especially men, talking about this. I love what you just said there, that it shouldn't be a they, it should just be the best person for that role. But obviously there are businesses out there that might be struggling with that diversity split, and they are looking to increase the amount of women coming into their business. And I think that it is wrong when people are hiring saying, I only want to hire females, because yes, you are positively discriminating, but ultimately as a female, that's not what people want. They don't want to be the token hire. They don't want to get the job just because of their gender. They want to get the job because they're right for that role. So what would you say to businesses that are trying to make that change, but are probably actually doing it to their detriment by saying to a recruiter, only find me female candidates?
The starting point is always always what I would call the awakening phase. And so it's indicating to all candidates that this is what it's like to work here. These are the kind of people that will want to work here. So where will people find out about you? A website is an obvious place. It's not the only place. So there should be really clear policies, for example, on your website. If you have a maternity policy that is even half decent, put it on there. Make sure it's really clear. Make it clear that you have values, for example, that mean that whilst men also have to leave the office to look after children, it's more likely the primary carer will be a woman. So she may well need to leave the office on time. If your values are like, put in all these extra hours, we're here till 1 a.m, then you're going to prevent that woman from applying for the job. She may be the best person that ever lived for that role, but you wouldn't know it. And so the first thing is this awakening, this awareness of what is it like to work here? What kind of people are attracted here? Because you need those first early adopters. It's like any kind of life cycle, like any bell curve. You'll get a few innovative individuals that are strong and powerful and will go for the interview and they'll get the job. Because the next phase is women will come into the office for an interview, having gone through the awakening phase, and then they'll look around and they'll say, oh, as I just did walking into your office here, I don't know what the mix was, but it looked roughly half and half-ish, maybe be more female than male.
We are more female, yeah, we're about 50%.
Perfect. So in that environment, a woman that's coming in is going to feel, I'm less likely to be discriminated against because people who are like me have chosen to work here. The things that I read, which were nice words, look like they might be true because lots of people who might be like me have made this choice. And that prevents us from having to say to a recruiter, like, please bring me more female candidates, because instead more female candidates naturally come to the door. And then we should still be making a decision based on the person with the best behaviours, attributes and values. But now the women who come to the door have an equal chance of being hired. And there is no need for that nasty taste in the mouth of, did I get hired because of my face, to make things look good, which nobody, think anybody wants that.
Yeah, I mean, we were joking with the film's crew. Are you going to get hired because of your height? They were like, I'm not putting my height, sorry. So, okay, so then we talk about language, and I think that's such an important topic to discuss when you're attracting talent, especially throughout the whole hiring process, through job specs. What advice would you give to businesses on those kind of words and phrases? And you've had the phrase of like the masculine, we want the hunter, we want somebody that's really determined and driven and ambitious. And obviously you want that in a female, but if you're looking at those really hard words that would attract a male looking at that job spec, you're going to create that barrier. But then also we don't want to say we're just going to completely change the whole tone, because ultimately you do want someone that's going to be driven and ambitious.
The evidence is that words matter. And whilst it's always dangerous to generalize, and there will always be women and men who buck the trend, nevertheless, in general, it's proven that women are more likely to respond to certain language and men to other language. We don't have a problem with getting men coming to the door, so it would make sense to change our language toward women. I'll give you an example of something that I don't know if I got this wrong, or if I could have done it better, or if I did it right, but it was certainly picked up on. So I was always quite inspired by an author called Kim Scott, and she's very famous for writing what's the book called? The Radical Candor.
Yes.
Radical Candor. But she also has done a lot of writing on hiring, and she has this really interesting philosophy, which I like, which she calls rock stars or superstars. And for her, rock stars are people who excel in the job that they're doing. They probably shouldn't be promoted because they'll start to fail, but they could get more money, more recognition, more award, more interest from expanding their scope in their current role. Superstars, on the other hand, are more likely to get promoted. And most of the business is set up for what she calls superstars. It's not set up for rock stars. Anyway, kind of by the by. So I was using some of this physiology in a particular organisation I was working for, and the chief people officer said, this really bothers me because like rock stars, that kind of language, it's not that a woman can't be a rock star. And it's not even that it would bother all women, but the evidence shows that women are less likely to apply if we say we'd give a rock star rather than superstars. It somehow feels a little bit testosterone driven. And anything that I can do to make sure I get the best possible breadth of candidates to the door is important. So we changed the wording. I don't have any data or evidence to prove that it was right, but we certainly did have a team in that particular organisation that was almost exactly 50-50 male-female. And also, interestingly, the same was true when we made a real effort to make sure that we had black candidates in the business. We first of all had one black female individual who, by the way, is still my assistant. Now, like several roles later,
and she is fantastic.
She's epic, cute, but once we had one, then we see others. And in fact, Rhoda's testimony is a lot of her friends went to work for Farfetch for the same reason. They looked at the website, they went into the interview and they saw, oh, there's other black faces, there's even black female faces. There are people like me. We don't always want to be like the one kind of pioneer who is like gotta be lonely and do that. We want to be able to have people we can empathize and relate to, and so creating that environment is critical, and anything we can do to get that awakening phase working, and then that secondary phase where I'm coming to the door, I see people who are like me. Those people are made available to me so I can talk to them about their experiences, because we all know that there are places where women are hired and it's not a great experience. But if great women are choosing to work here, there's probably a good reason for that. And so it's now on me to provide an environment that gives the proof that what I thought I was going to get when I came to the door is what I get.
Because there's so much noise out there for this topic, and I think people, when you talk about values, and they say all the right things on their website and in interviews, but it is just word. Like, it's a word. They're trying to tick the boxes of making it feel like it is an inclusive, supportive workplace to work, but actually when you come into the business and you really feel it and you understand what people's experiences are like in that company and you see it firsthand for yourself, you realize, right, this isn't just something on a wall or on a piece of paper. They actually live and breathe by that.
Yes.
Yeah.
You nailed it. I can give you an example. I mean, I can't give you a better answer than that because you're right. I remember we had a town hall in the company I was working with, and the one of the salespeople, in fact, the best salesperson, he stood up in the town hall to say, we have this value of just team over self, and I want to thank this particular engineer who stayed till 1 o'clock in the morning to help me with some complicated stuff for a client, and looks like we're going to get the deal signed. Thank you very much. So of course we all applauded, we're all really pleased that this guy hung around. But the CEO and I spoke about this afterwards, and in the end I went and had a chat with her and said, look, we're really pleased that you gave props to this guy. I mean, we're really pleased with what he did. But the way that we did it is not in line with the way we've defined our values, because not just women, but anyone who has got kids and needs to leave the office to go pick them up, or who lives outside of London, so probably you're more likely to live outside of London if you're in a family unit, aren't you, than if you're single or if you're a bit older. Those people instantly, the impression they get is not, this is wonderful, it's, gosh, I can't live up to that value.
Yeah.
I have to leave the office at 5 if I'm going to pick up my kids from daycare. And that disproportionately affects women versus men. So when we say team over self as a value, which by the way was a brilliant value that really helped the company to grow, what exactly does that mean? And I can't take credit for this, but what the CEO did with his coach was every quarter we spent 3 hours in one executive team meeting only discussing one of our 5 values. And what you very quickly realise is, we've all got slightly different interpretations of what this means. What this particular salesperson had done when she gave that speech, it's hard to criticise her too much because she was doing the right thing. So how, if we all make a different interpretation, how much more will our teams do that? How do we help to educate our team that this is what it means to inhabit that value? And so there isn't just some nice stuff on the wall that we get to attract candidates, but if we're going to live it, what does it mean to live that value? What's the exegesis of that word? How do you put it out and make it real? And I think that was very meaningful, and it meant that the entire team felt a sense of connection to the value because they knew what it meant. And if you didn't like it because it was such an authentic, real, true value, then you would probably leave because it wouldn't be for you.
Yeah. And I know we'll get onto this topic of progression and having those values nailed so that there is absolutely no question for where that grey area is, and it's you're either hitting it or you're not. But I think that point of just open discussion, like speaking about things, calling people out when actually that wasn't quite right, and being okay with that open feedback. I have met so many people and spoken with so many people about this topic, and I constantly get responses of, I feel like I might say the wrong thing. I'm going to mess up. I'm terrified. And as a female, I'm still terrified that I might say the wrong thing or insult someone. People could be receiving what you're saying and think in a different way, and it might not ring true to them. And that is the beauty of these discussions. And I think as long as we are having these conversations, that's really important, because otherwise, if you just stay quiet and you don't talk about it and you don't voice it, and then you come into unconscious bias, and if somebody's saying something inappropriate, it's all about that communication and actually just being open and honest with each other about, hey, that wasn't quite right, but let's talk about how we can make it better.
Yeah, there's three things that I would recommend to anyone, especially leaders, that they embrace. The first is intentionality, the second is curiosity, and the third is courage. I can think of one example. So my co-founder Emily and I, we've worked together for many years. And I remember a long time ago, it's the first time we've worked together, and we were having a discussion because there'd been a story in the news that some leaders, male leaders, were only willing now to do one-to-ones with their female members of staff if someone else was in the room, because they were scared of being accused of doing something wrong.
Wow.
And so we were discussing this, and my view was, it's ridiculous. If you are behaving well and you're behaving normally, it's very unlikely anything like that would happen. And I'm prepared to take the risk. It's a stupid thing to worry about. And like, her response was good. That's exactly how I and all the women I know would like it to be. But if your intention is right and you make a mistake, the majority of us will forgive that. Think if your bravery is good and you decide and care if I might get this wrong, I've consulted with others, I've talked to people I respect, I think this is a good thing to do, we're going to do it. If you get it wrong, great leaders, when they get it wrong, they change their mind quickly, they hold their hands up, they apologize, they listen to feedback. If you're a good leader, you will have made mistakes constantly. So be brave and make some choices that benefit the groups who rely upon you for making those good decisions. And if you've got intentionality and bravery, and then finally curiosity, then you're going to be asking the questions, and you're going to be asking people in your group, people who care about this. Take care, I guess I should say as a side note, take care not to treat the only black woman in your business as the voice of all black humanity. She didn't get hired to do that. She wants to do a job. She's not here to be a spokesperson for her ethnicity. But some people are willing to have those conversations, and there certainly are plenty of experts and other companies that have done this. Talk to those people, and then you can make a decision if you have the right degree of curiosity, but don't do nothing.
Yeah, there's a fine mix of being curious and having those conversations with your employees to educate yourself on this topic. But then also, you as a leader do need to go away, do your own due diligence, read up on that topic, and not expect, as you said, them to be that spokesperson. I had an incredible experience with our manager, Jack Catterall. He's one of the most empathetic, vulnerable leaders I've ever had the pleasure of working with. And the reason why, I think you were saying, like, what makes us successful with the work that we do, I think it's a huge testament down to him. And he's so curious. And one of the things I will never forget is the Sarah Everard case when she, a couple of years ago, got murdered. And we had a whole company stand up and conversation about what we can do to be better and to support the women in our business. And so he actually started this conversation. He rang up every single girl in the team and said, hey, I just want to have a chat. I want to be educated more on what I can do as a man to support you. Can you just speak at me, and can we have this conversation? And it was one of the most incredible conversations I've ever had, because I was like, wow, he actually really cares. He could have easily gone, this is really sad, but I'm not going to speak to the women in my team. And that time that he took to do that with every single person individually made us all as women feel seen, feel heard, feel supported. And now from that, I know that I can go to him with anything.
Yes.
And I know that he's going to listen and want to learn as well.
Yeah, I find that really moving. But it's so, it shouldn't be, because it's so basic and obvious. It's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But it's not that common.
No.
So clearly Jack is a really empathetic, capable leader who's got those three things that I spoke about: the intentionality, the bravery, the curiosity. Not rocket science though, is it?
No. That is what we said before, people are doing it. So the last point on this attraction piece before we get onto progression and people being successful in their careers is salaries. This is a really interesting debate that I've been having with quite a few people recently. Do you put it in a job spec?
I don't think there is a correct answer to this. I don't think it matters. What matters is that if you are asked by anyone in your team that you are paying people equally, you should be willing to be transparent. But we all know that when you are trying to hire someone, you are selling the job. And sometimes you want to get great people. So that imagine you're a young startup, you've got hardly any money, you want to hire the best people in the world, so you make a big deal of all the many benefits you get from working in a startup. You might not tell them that the pay is horrific. They might guess, but you might not put that in the ad because you want to excite them and they get in the look. That's a reasonable way to behave.
Yeah.
Just as it's perfectly reasonable to give a salary range. What is not reasonable is to not pay people for their worth and their value. And if you've got two salespeople doing the same job, regardless of any kind of difference they may have, and in this conversation, male, female, you pay them the same. And if someone asks, you tell them. You need to be transparent. It shouldn't be a secret.
Yeah. The reason I asked is that I've been having this debate with somebody that I know quite well in the industry. She says you absolutely should not put salaries on a job spec because somebody that's coming in for that role might be being seriously underpaid in their current role. So if you put that salary on the job spec, they are going to only get what you've advertised and you'll probably then drop the salary if you know what their salary is at the moment. And actually it should be, let's pay them what you think they are worth and the talent that they're bringing into the business. But I think there's an argument to both sides.
There definitely is. Like I said, I don't think there's a right answer, but there's two further things to say. One is, I really like the Netflix model, which says, look, what is this role worth? That's what we're going to pay you. That's the worth of that role. And the second thing, I think, is it's a deeper piece on working with women in general, because for every confident, capable woman who has had a reasonably good path through the workplace, there's another 9 that absolutely haven't. And women are more likely than men, and this isn't my idea, we've seen this written down in plenty of studies, women are much more likely to look at a job spec and say, I haven't actually done all of those things, probably shouldn't apply. Gosh, the salary's quite high, I'm not earning that right now. They'll probably find out what an imposter I am and I won't be any good at this, I shouldn't apply. And the equivalent man is likely to say, let's give it a go.
Yeah, that looks nice.
Got a sort of money as well.
Look at all the holidays I could go.
Yeah, exactly, all of that. And that's crazy because there is, when it comes to doing a role, there is no generalization. Men and women in general bring different attributes to a role, but as individuals, anyone who has got the skills and the values and the behaviors that should allow them to apply for that is worthy of that salary. But I think women often underestimate how good they are, and this is a societal thing. It starts in Primark, doesn't it, with like unicorns in pink t-shirts for girls and let's get in the army for boys. That's where it begins. Nothing wrong with pink, but that's where it begins, with this positioning of you're delicate and you're tough. And it ends with I'm not worthy of $100,000 salary because I didn't have one before. It's awful. And so that is an education piece.
I had that when I used to work in events. Somebody that was arranging the event went right, left, blue jobs for the boys, pink jobs for the girls.
What?
I was 17 and I said, excuse me, what? And he goes, pink jobs, folding the napkins, laying the table, blue jobs, lifting the chairs, moving the tables. And I went, excuse me, I actually am able to lift a chair and move a table. I'm going to do that one. But I had the confidence to say that and I was just appalled. But so many people would go, okay, yep. And it's nuts that happened 10 years ago. It's crazy. I've literally made myself sound like I'm 27. I'm nearly 30. So that happened 13 years ago. I'm making myself younger. It's all good.
No, quite right. So, but I do want to pick up on something there, because isn't it, it's a kind of funny story in a way, but isn't it really upsetting that you remember that moment?
Yeah.
Because it's the individual that said that to you has probably never thought of it from 2 minutes after, even though you challenged him in a way. He's probably never thought about it again. And when this happens to both men and women, it happens to all of us. Words matter, as we said earlier, and sometimes someone will say something to you without considering it, and I'm sure that both you and I have also done this to people. We're not perfect, but those words can stay with people forever. And that conversation has remained with you as a sign of you are viewed as less capable than other people. You're pink, and therefore you've got to do the delicate jobs like folding the serviettes. And it's when you are repeatedly given that message by society that it's hard not to let some of it seep in. And I think that is why some women, because they've got that message from their partner and their parents and their school and the media and society and now their boss at work, it's just exhausting, I think. And sometimes you kind of believe in a bit of it. And that's why, even though I've got lots of things to say about imposter syndrome and whether it's a thing or not, if I were to talk to all of my clients, I guarantee you more women than men would say, I think I have imposter syndrome. I think that's partly where it comes from.
And you are right, it is exhausting. When you say I think, it's just ingrained in you and it's become the norm.
Yeah.
Okay, we could literally speak for hours, but I really want to get on to progression because I know that you have some incredible advice for businesses on how they can ensure that women can progress as far as they desire and that they're worthy to progress. What are some tactics that businesses watching this today can take away to really make sure that women are successful?
Well, there's so many things, but the first thing is there are a number of key events that happen to most women and happen to a much lesser degree or not at all to men. Babies are a pretty good example. Men have babies, but they don't carry it, and they're much less likely to be the one that needs to stay at home. They don't need to recover for an operation. We know that if we hire women, some of them will have a baby, and we know that the value that those women give to us is all the worth them having some maternity leave and not being here. So let's make it incredibly clear. What does it look like to have maternity leave? We're in revenue. What happens if I'm a sales leader and I'm going to take a bunch of months off? Half of my pay is bonuses and commission. Will I get that? Why the hell not? You absolutely should. Why shouldn't I get that? How many women do you know that have ended up leaving a company shortly after they've returned from maternity leave? It's quite high. Employers say, well, it's because she was always going to leave. Not true at all. It's because they got treated so badly during what should have been one of the most important, precious parts of their life. They decided to leave because why would I want to work for this awful company that can't treat me well? So what are those events that happen to women? What about older women who experience the menopause? We know, for example, doctors don't care at all about this half the time, at least in general. It's only very recently that we've started to see it in the media as a thing. It's been embarrassing for older women to be, I might perspire a bit and go a bit red and have a hot flush. Like, how embarrassing that. It's a thing that happens in the life of every single woman. Why should we not accept that it's a thing? If we're going to put prayer rooms in for our Muslim members of staff, why wouldn't we put some kind of space in where a woman can recover because she's still going to be brilliant at her job? So the first thing is, like, what are those key things that impact this gender in particular? How can we demonstrate meaningfully that we can really do stuff? So that's the first thing. I know your question is about progression, but how can I progress if the playing field isn't level? You know, if I go off for a few months and some other person gets the job. Here's another one. What about when you are returning from maternity leave? And of course, this is not at all my lived experience, but I did coach people who tell me things. And what I gather is that it's quite intimidating to come back. Like, you feel kind of baby-brained, like I'm a little bit stupid. You also feel like the world continued and I'm now several months behind everybody else. And obviously the world did continue. Like, decisions got made, people got hired and fired, things happened, you weren't a part of that. And so a lot of women feel like when I go back, can I even do this? I specifically remember both my wife and my mother, who took time off to have their children, both felt, my mother was a radiographer and digital kind of happened while she was off. Like, I won't be able to do any of this. God, I've never done, I don't even work a computer. It took her 2-week training course and she was fine. Obviously she was fine.
Yeah.
But she worried that she wouldn't be. So if we know that that's true, then we should accept that that's completely normal. And how do we help people through these important life moments in return for getting this incredible workforce that are diverse, are committed to us, where you just shared about Jack, didn't you? And I would imagine that the chances of you staying at Wiser are greater because you're working for someone that you've got a lot of respect for and you enjoy working with. If that during that Sarah Everard case, he had been dismissive, I imagine lots of people here would have thought, there must be something better than this. So I'm sure that's not why he did it, but it certainly makes you want to stay and be loyal because you're in a wonderful environment. The second thing that I would be thinking about is how we handle things like progression reviews. We've already touched on this idea that, again, we're generalising, and it's always been dangerous to generalise. There are plenty of women who are very capable of saying what they need to say, but it's true that, again, women are more likely to be more modest. Women are more likely to need preparation time. They're less likely to fire from the hip. So you don't need to prescribe that a woman will be like that. There are plenty of women that are not like that. Give everybody, male and female, the opportunity. Let's talk about a review. If I come into a review with you and you need preparation time and I fire questions at you and you look a bit blank and answer me badly because you needed preparation time, and my takeaway is she's a bit thick and I don't want to promote her, whose fault is that, yours or mine?
Yours.
Exactly. If a week before I'd said we're going to do a review, these are the questions we're going to run through, I'd love it if you prepare for them, I will be preparing too, then, and you've got your notes in front of you perhaps because you're newer typist, I can't remember everything, so I need to look at stuff, then I would be able to compare like with like. And so I do want to reiterate, not all women are like that, not all men are on the other side, but it's just an imbalance, and we're not giving people the opportunity to flourish and succeed because of that patriarchal way that we run things. And I think the final thing, and we kind of touched on this before, but all these subjects are related, is I would invite any male leader to question the bits that can't be seen, the blind spots. If you think about, if you listen to this and you don't know it, Google the Johari window. It sounds like some crazy, like, mystical thing. It's actually like two blokes called like John and Harry or something. But the Johari window just invites you and those around you to put words that describe you into 4 different windows. And one of those windows is called blind spot. And it's things that people say about me that I don't say about myself. And we all know that we have blind spots. There are things in a man's lived experience that mean he cannot understand what it is like to grow up as a woman because he didn't have that. How many wives and sisters you've got, you didn't grow up in that way, so you might well get that wrong. So that the listening to what those items are, so that the decisions you take aren't just inherently patriarchal, but do their best to be open-minded without ever not being a bloke. It's okay, it's not wrong to be a man. It's simply right to understand that there are things that you don't understand, there are things that you don't know. So find out from the people around you what those are. And for each of us, it will be different, but it means you can create an environment that people feel safe in. And if you feel safe, you succeed. Just quickly on this, there is a brilliant study by Amy Edmondson, who is at Harvard, I believe, and her study in psychological safety looked at surgeons, and in particular the surgical teams and the death rates that those teams ended up with. And what they discovered, quite counterintuitively, was the surgical teams that made the most mistakes were the ones that had the lowest death rates, and the ones with the least mistakes had the highest death rate. That seems back to front. The reason they figured out was the surgeons that were really tough, like, how dare you make that mistake, Izzy, it's a disaster, like, it's your last chance. Izzy didn't want to admit next time that she'd made a mistake, she didn't want to lose her job. So people didn't admit to their mistakes, they couldn't improve, therefore the death rate remained higher. But those that were working in a safe space were like, I'm really sorry, I think I've got this wrong. Let's work through that with you so that doesn't happen again. Death rate became lower. So creating that safe space where people are able to operate effectively is, for me, a baseline for all tests.
Such great advice. Before we end, Pete, because I genuinely could do a 2-hour podcast about this, you shared with me previously a story that I would love for you to share with our listeners, and it links to what you said there about that patriarchal behaviour and people just realising that actually, to the point of what women go through in their experiences, people are going to be different to yourself. And if you are a male manager, you need to be open to the fact that people might react, might behave differently, might have different emotions to how you would run things. And when we're talking about progression and making sure that women succeed, I think that's really important for us to be aware of the fact that everybody is an individual and we should all support them as individuals, not as a blanket approach.
I had a female employee, and she was highly emotionally driven, and so she would cry quite a lot. It was never once that sort of manipulation. It was just her natural reaction. And sometimes when she was happy, sometimes when like things touched her, sometimes when she was upset. Why is an emotional response a bad thing? We spend a lot of time saying that we want people who are empathetic, people who are able to relate. There's nothing wrong with being purely logic driven, but there's certainly nothing wrong with being empathetic. And so if one of the outcomes of that is sometimes I cry as a reaction to something, isn't it your discomfort with that show of emotion that's the problem, rather than the fact that I do that? And she would apologize. I'm like, why? It's totally reasonable. This is a sad event. I don't act like that. I mean, can't wish I could, but I just don't. I'm not like that at all. You are. It doesn't matter. It's fine. So long as we're getting to the right response, and so long as we're getting to a good answer, and you're a highly valued member of my team, and I kind of want to know when you have an emotional response, because emotional responses are not illogical. Emotional responses tend to be driven from our subconscious. So when we have an emotional response, it's not that this person is not being mathematical, it's that she has seen things that are like this before. She understands how this tends to play out. She gives you advice. It sounds intuitive. A lot of male leaders are like, oh, what's this, like, doesn't make any sense, like, it's not logical. That is a blind spot. We all know that sometimes we have a feeling about the right way to behave, the right way to talk, the right thing to say. Where does that come from? It comes from your experience, your subconscious. And so someone whose emotional response is to cry is giving you great information, and being uncomfortable with that is, in my view, quite an old-fashioned male response. Nothing wrong, by the way, to any men listening to this, to wanting to comfort someone who cries. We all don't want to see somebody sad, but crying is not only about I am unhappy, I've been made sad, please make me feel better. It's simply I'm having an emotional response, and then you can explore that with that individual if necessary. I hope that was the story you were talking about.
That was the story. But I just think it finishes off this conversation so well. To change the industry for the better, we have to realise that we have to change our behaviours. And through that, it means that we can't expect everybody to act the same, and especially act the way that probably we've been acting in the past, which is creating clones of people. And that's not what we want to do. We want people to be able to be their authentic self, be emotional, be vulnerable, be open, have these discussions, mess up, make mistakes, learn from them, as you said from that study. And if we can all work together on that, then I think we will move in the right direction. And it's people like yourselves that are allowing us to make those changes. So thank you so much.
I'm not sure that's true, but it's a real pleasure to be. I would just like to say one thing on that. Sorry to keep talking. I hope there's enough tape in the camera.
Hey, you go for it.
I think it is incumbent on older generations to accept properly that society shifts as well. How many times have we heard older generations say things like, all music today is awful, or people are just on their phone all the time, or like millions of things like this. Like, it was always better when they were younger, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I'm sure that every generation will be like that. In fact, I saw a meme the other day that showed that it had quotes from every century going back to the 15th century, with people saying youth these days are awful, like it was much better in the past. Like people were saying this in the 1400s. But leaders are like this too. As you get older, you become naturally more averse to change. Why is it that, like, when your great granny is like got a phone, so I don't know how to work this, like, it's not stupid. Why can't she figure out her Wi-Fi? She's not an idiot. So why do you have to do that? It's because it's harder to accept change and progression as you get older. I think that's a muscle. So as a leader, you want to be looking to, for example, a millennial generation, a Gen Z generation, and welcome in the things they're bringing into your workplace, because that helps you to adapt. And we keep talking about blind spots. It's this idea of how can I understand how a 21-year-old young woman feels when I'm a 50-year-old bloke? Well, I can't. It's probably different to the way my wife feels or my older daughter. So what is that like, and how do we help her to be brilliant in this role, to progress, to enjoy herself, to attract other women into this role, just to love what she's doing? It's hard to do that without having that curiosity and that acceptance of what it means to constantly change.
Oh, so good. You need to write a book. I mean, you are, aren't you? So
Not on this topic.
Not on this topic, you do need to expect that soon. But thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom and advice. But as we end every single episode on Sales Unfiltered, I'd love to ask you, what is one challenge that you faced in your life or your career that's really shaped you to where you are today?
It's my eldest daughter. So she will be 23 in June, but we were told she wouldn't live past the age of 5. Yeah, so she's been disabled all of her life. She doesn't want any sympathy. She's a high achiever. She competed for the British team at para dressage until she got too sick. So she's a very accomplished individual. But every single time, like not even an exaggeration, every single time, I worked in China for about a year and a half, and we decided that I couldn't go there to live because she also has a nut allergy. So her doctor specialists are over here, and nut allergy isn't ideal if you're going to live in Asia. There's quite a staple part of the diet. If you don't speak the language, it's quite challenging.
Yeah.
And so I remember at the time the CEO was really wanting me to move there. So he asked a couple of times, and then his wife phoned my wife and said, we've realised that we could locate you to Hong Kong. We can ship the horses out there. It's got the 2008 Beijing dressage arenas are all in Hong Kong. Be amazing for your daughter. I had a look at the maps, it's still 3,000 miles from Hong Kong to Beijing. My family are going to be completely alone, and my daughter won't have her doctors around. So I said no, and obviously, I'm not very good at saying no, and I don't like accepting that I can't do things. But my big learning was, if it's the right thing to do, people will find a way to make it work. So if they found a way to make it work. One year I travelled 40 times to China in a year.
Wow.
Yeah, so every weekend. And this is what I was going to say. Every weekend I was from Manchester at the time, you couldn't fly direct to Beijing. So every weekend I was Frankfurt or Munich or Heathrow or something, getting the connection. And I'm on the phone with my wife, and she's like, I think we're going to need to go to hospital. It's not looking good. I've called the ambulance. I was in a board meeting once when the helicopter was landing in our field because my daughter had had a suspected heart attack and we took her to the hospital. And so I think what you learn is, there's a reason that we're doing these things, and that reason is your family. Second, you can make decisions that benefit your family and not you. And those decisions, because they're authentic and the right decisions, never once held my career back, even though I always worried that it would. And number 3, I think you end up feeling incredibly blessed by those decisions because, I said, I've got colleagues who've lost children. I haven't, because she's 18 years older than she should have been, and still doing all right with a golden retriever assistance dog and enjoying her life and doing all right. So it shapes all of my decisions. Has to do with my other 2 children as well, shapes all of my decisions. But my biggest learning was, you can put those things first and you can achieve. In fact, I mentioned Kim Scott earlier, but there's a really interesting story that she told where she had to turn down the role, I think it was CEO of Twitter, because she was pregnant and she'd struggled to get pregnant, and it was a difficult pregnancy, and there was a very, for a reason, strong, capable businesswoman, too much twin stuff, and there was this risk of damage to her unborn child. So to her regret, she said no, and it kind of killed her to say no. And then when the baby was born, she was invited to go coach the CEO, the new CEO of Twitter, and various others, just because she loved it even more. Making those right decisions opens up some fabulous opportunities that you just can't anticipate.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. Your daughter's such an inspiration, and I think from all of these conversations I've had with incredible leaders like yourself, family is the most important. A job is a job, and like one will come up, and I'm sure you can go back to Beijing as many times as you want, but being with your family is the most important. So thank you. Pete, this has been incredible. Hopefully everybody at home listening to this or wherever you're listening has learned something, and thank you for all of the work that you do in the industry.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for listening. Check out the channel for more episodes like this one, and we'll see you next week.